breasted. This is an analysis of moral teachings along the Nile. And as the Blue Book breasted, the dawn of conscience. B-R-E-S-T, maybe E-A-D. He's a very famous Egyptologist. It's in that book you will find the best account of the teachings of Amenemel, and also Breasted will there give you the Egyptian sources of the Old Testament writings. He will point out to you that certain passages in the Old Testament which contain peculiar idioms that make no sense among a pastoral people make exquisite sense among a river-dwelling people. And he'll cite you the parallel passages showing how deeply the Jewish people were in debt for their head start to the Egyptian education which a corporal guard of leaders had. Moses, Jethro, Joshua, and a few others. Moses, I think, had a very advanced concept. And this Jew comes very close to being an ideal of mine. Moses succeeded. Akhenaten failed. Akhenaten, as Pharaoh of Egypt, with the Egyptian Army, Navy, and Marine Corps behind him, couldn't push monotheism across because he was a rigid, brittle idealist, just like Abner in the days of Jesus. He failed totally. Moses was a politician. Moses was willing to roll with the punches. Moses didn't hesitate. When he couldn't put monotheism across, he dug a second line of trenches and retreated. He sold henotheism. He said, all right, there's more than one God, but there's no one bigger than Yahweh. Yahweh is the head God. Because he knew from that second line they could someday advance again to monotheism. Moses got a break when Sinai blew its stack, and I don't know how much conniving went on in this shrewd old leader's mind, and how long he was up on that mountain, and how much play acting there was. Because here's a man who has got a desperately difficult problem. He has got a rabble, a literal rabble of illiterate Bedouins, nomads. How's he going to weld them into a people and give them a religion? He succeeded, and I think he succeeded first because he was a shrewd politician as well as having a clear-cut ideal, and he succeeded because, I think, the volcano blew up. And this was very convincing. These people never conquered Canaan. They infiltrated Canaan. They came in as a less cultured group working with a more cultured group. Much of the Old Testament reflects not only a struggle between polytheism and monotheism, but also a struggle between the land customs of the Bedouins and the land customs of agriculturalists. So you've got a peculiar switch here. The polytheists had a more advanced civilization than the monotheists. The polytheists believed in the private ownership of land. The monotheists believed in the tribal ownership of land, as you have it in a pastoral society. Eventually, the Jewish people intermarried, interlocked with the Canaanites, adopted many of their customs, in turn became one of the peoples of Palestine. They had as refugees over on the coastline Philistines. And these people were probably the most culturally advanced group in Palestine because they had iron at a very early age. I suspect that the Philistines were refugees from Crete. The island of Crete was smashed by the invading Greek barbarians at about the time Moses left Egypt. These same seafarers were probably the ones that were harassing the Nile Delta. I think you have no real tradition of I think you have no real acceptance of monotheism during these times. The Old Testament as we have it today is a rewrite. in the days of the captivity to make this into the darndest piece of propaganda that's ever been written since the Russians rewrote history to prove communism. This is a complete rewrite of history designed to glorify the Jewish people and to build up the monotheistic concept. As the Blue Book says, there never were 12 tribes to begin with. There were just a couple of good-sized tribes: Benjamin, Ephraim, Judah, and a few other little ones. These people established a precarious kingdom, which became two, and they lived on the fringe of Palestine itself. Is an Alsace-Lorraine between two major centers of civilization: Mesopotamia in the east and Egypt in the southwest. As the Mesopotamians were in the ascendancy, Palestine and Phoenicia became under their rule. When the Egyptians were in the ascendancy, Palestine and Phoenicia were under Egyptian rule. When it was a standoff, then Palestine and Egypt could be independent and could flourish on their own. The whole thing, Toynbee points out that the Damascus area, Palestine, and Phoenicia are basically an independent culture, a Semitic culture, regardless of the fact they were never unified politically, and that they made three major contributions to human civilization. They discovered monotheism, the alphabet, and the Atlantic Ocean. He lumps the Phoenicians right in with the Jewish people as being an identical race. They're all a Semitic group.
Well, the Alsace-Lorraine analogy is quite complicated.
That's right.
Too young.
Now, Alsace-Lorraine at times achieved independence. You've heard of Burgundy. In the Vagabond King, the Burgundians are threatening Paris, and one of the highlights in one of the songs is "And to Hell with Burgundy." Burgundy at one time was an independent state, or at least an independent duchy, and held its own against France on the one hand and Germany on the other. The ragtag end of Burgundy today is Holland and Belgium in the north. The rest of it is either French or German. This situation obtained until the Palestinians maintained a precarious independence, all the more so after they split into two kingdoms. As you will recall in the Blue Book, David is made out to be quite a low-down political type. When they rewrote the Old Testament, they really rewrote David's character.
They told a lot of things in the Old Testament.
Well, David's treatment of Uriah is one of the dirtiest tricks that a monarch ever played on a well-meaning colonel of infantry. First he gets his wife pregnant. Then he sends for the old boy so that he can explain the pregnancy. When the old boy won't sleep with his wife while there's war on, he has him put in the front rank so he'll be sure to be killed. The morals of those days, again, are the proper yardsticks of the judgment of conduct at those times. We have no right to judge those people by our standards any more than we will care to be judged by the standards of 1,000 years from now. I think one of my favorite texts from the Old Testament is the story of David's old age. As it says, when the king waxed old and his body gat no heat, they did put a virgin to bed with him, and when nothing happened, then they knew the end was near. When his body gat no heat, that appeals to me very much. David was a very salty character. Solomon was a shrewd operator. And these people profited for the fact that neither Egypt nor Mesopotamia were strong at that time. They suffered terribly when the Assyrians were on the rampage. And Assyria became a serious menace along about 800 BC, 700 BC, and in through there. They formed confederations to check the Assyrians. You see, Assyria... All right, now, can you visualize Mesopotamia?
Oh, yeah, I have that.
All right.
Where is Assyria with the Alsace-Lorraine and...
Assyria is at the north end of Mesopotamia.
All right, I'm with you.
Really at the northwest end,
In other
because
words-
Mesopotamia runs at a diagonal, you know.
Such aggressive actions would come
Yeah.
in from the north then,
Right.
probably along the coastline.
Now let's make it parallel. Can you think of when the Turks were invading Europe? Can you think of the importance that Austria played? Because Austria was the shield of Europe. Assyria was the shield of Mesopotamia against the barbarians. Assyria was what you might call a marcher province. Let me explain that. A marcher province is a frontier province where your local civil administrator is also a military commander. The marcher provinces in England faced Wales when Wales was not a part of England. In Germany, the term count is Graf, G-R-A-F. A marching count is called a Margraf, whence we get the term marquis. And a marquis outranks a count by 1 degree. Count being the same as an English earl. A marcher earl in England had military as well as civil authority. The term mark means a march. The Mark of Brandenburg was once one of the German marches protecting Germany from the Slavs. The original name for Austria is Ostmark, which means the Eastern March. So Assyria was a frontier marcher province acting as a shield for Mesopotamia. And sometimes these marcher provinces, instead of defending the civilized hinterland, become conquerors. And Assyria became the conqueror of Mesopotamia, Palestine, Phoenicia, and for a short time, Egypt. Assyria was the terror of the ancient world. They put iron to use very effectively. They had the best army that the ancient world probably ever developed. And Assyria lasted until a confederation rose against her of the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Medes. And they sacked Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria. They did not smash the Assyrian army. It retired intact and lasted at, I think, Haran, which is near Nineveh, for about 10 years. It was finally destroyed. This then left things in a status quo ante. Sort of like they set the clock back after the days of Napoleon. You know, Napoleon overran Europe and changed all the boundaries, and then at the Treaty Congress of Vienna, when you compare before and after Napoleon, there's quite a similarity with some shifts. You have an independent Babylonia, you have an independent Persia, an independent Media, you have an independent Egypt, and you have independent states in Phoenicia and Damascus and Palestine. This is the twilight of Jewish independence. And this lasted until the Jewish boys got to playing footsie between the Egyptians and the Babylonians. And they first went under Egyptian bondage, and then later on, Babylonia conquered them lightly. Then when they rebelled, she really crushed them. Now this is in the 600s thereabout, near 700, right? In the 7th century BC, the 600s. The Babylonians, this is Nebuchadnezzar and all that. The Babylonians pulled down the walls of Jerusalem in their final conquest, and they simply deported the Jewish people to Babylon. And many of them never came back. From this fate, they were rescued by the conquests of Cyrus, Belshazzar's feast, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin, etc. Cyrus was the Persian, who in conquering Babylon and Media established the Persian Empire, and he liberated the Jewish people. It was during this Babylonian captivity in in the 600s BC that the big ideological battle was fought between the clergy, patriots, and Deutero-Isaiah, with the concept of a God of all nations, and a non-nationalistic approach to religion. And it was the victory of the clergy patriots that determined the rewriting of the Old Testament as we now have it, the elimination of all mention of anything which did not glorify the Jewish people, except for some oversights on their part, and the building up of the Jewish national consciousness to the level of a Herrenvolk. See, the Jewish ego is very similar to the Nazi ego. And the Jewish are like the Irish. They have not oppressed many people because there are too damn few of them. The Irish have a pretty clean record because there aren't enough Irish to oppress anyone. The Irish should be just as big a bunch of stinkers as the English if there'd been enough Irishmen. You follow me? I'm part Irish, so I have a right to say this. The only people who have never oppressed other people have been few in numbers. It's human nature to oppress, I think. The Jewish people went back and they rebuilt the temple. And under the Persians, they had a pretty easy time. The Jewish people were an autonomous principality within the Persian Empire. Very little is known.
600, or is this now 500?
We're now going down from 500 and 400 into about 330 BC. We're going through a couple hundred years in here now. Very little is known about this period.
From 300 to 100?
No, roughly from 550 to about 350. Not much is known. The Persians were governed with a loose rein. The Persians believed in local autonomy. Cyrus was a political genius.
Was he a Babylonian or a Persian?
Cyrus was Persian. You know, where Persia proper was a province down around the Persian Gulf and a little ways inland from Elam. Persis is the name of it. Cyrus conquered because he brought peace, and after the Assyrian Holocaust and all the wars, people were fed up with war, and he governed with a loose rein. In other words, you got local customs, local gods, fine, we'll adopt them. You can have your local religion, just pay taxes to the imperial government. He broke his empire up into satrapies. You occasionally hear the word satrap used to designate a big mogul. It's not used as often, but the word satrap was a viceroy in the Persian Empire in charge of one of the main provinces. Those were the primary divisions, like the states of our union. This lasted until Alexander smashed the Persian Empire. Now, just to pick up a couple of familiar happenings, during this time we have Marathon, 490 BC. We have Salamis and Plataea, 10-20 years later. We have the Peloponnesian War, which smashed Greece in the later 400s. Pericles, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. We're now down in the early 300s, the larger three, the early 300s. And you have Aristotle and Philip of Macedon. And he was the guy that built the state and the nucleus of the army that smashed Greece, that enlisted Greece, and he smashed, his son Alexander smashed Persia. This is about 335, more or less, BC. Still no problem with the Jewish people. Alexander's empire broke up within the 30 years after his death, and it was parceled out among a group of people called the Diadochi. And that is a Greek word meaning successors. That's all it means. And it's used in a peculiar sense in history as the successors of Alexander. And they were his generals. Ptolemy got Egypt. Cleopatra was a later-day descendant of the Ptolemies. Antiochus got the bulk of the Asiatic portion of Alexander's empire. This included Palestine, Syria, I'll use modern terms, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, all the way into the Indus River. It was with the successors of Antiochus, and they alternated between the name Antiochus and Seleucus. Antioch was named for Antiochus. They're called the Seleucidae. That's the name of the house that ruled. It was with these people that the Jews eventually came into collision. Greek culture had an extremely penetrating effect. Most surrounding cultures disclosed a high degree of porosity to Greek culture. They might resist other penetrating cultures, but Greek culture had a siren song to sing. The empire of the Seleucidae was nibbled at in the east. It was finally broken in the middle by the Parthians, who came down from what's now the Caspian region and cut off the eastern chunk of this empire from the western chunk by invading what's now modern Persia. There was a Greek remnant left in the east called Bactria, which is an interesting story that doesn't concern us. The western portion of this empire was reduced to what's now Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan. Roughly the Fertile Crescent.
Still, Egypt is where?
Egypt is independent under the Ptolemies.
Still under the top.
Right. Greece is a mishmash with Macedonia to the north. Rome is making its appearance. It was at about this time when the Parthians were tying up the Seleucidae in the east that the Maccabees arose in Palestine. And these were pretty potent generals. And they fought like holy hell. I understand that the Jew of that time was famed as a mercenary soldier. They were known as hard fighters, like the Swiss in the Middle Ages. The Jews fought and got their independence because they had the covert and sometimes overt backing of Rome. Rome made its first appearance in this area about 190 odd BC, when the Roman legions tackled the last great military leader of the Seleucidae, Antiochus III, Antiochus the Great, and they smashed him at the Battle of Magnesia. As the first Roman venture in the east. She didn't come to conquer. She came to knock Antiochus down. It was Roman policy to divide and rule. So for 100 years, or 150 years, the Roman Senate was pro-Jewish. Because as long as the Jews are independent, that's one more little kingdom. And the more little kingdoms we have out there, the less trouble we have to fear in the east, in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. We want lots of small states, see, divide and rule. The Jews under the Maccabees prospered. They rebuilt their kingdom. At one time, under Alexander somebody or other, who was a Jew, this kingdom reached its largest extent, even larger than it was in the days of David and Solomon.
Was this after Carthage?
Carthage fell in 146 BC. Right. And Corinth was destroyed by the Romans in 146 BC. You can figure that Rome is dominant in the Mediterranean after that date. That's a good date to remember.
146.
146 BC. You got 2 for 1, both Carthage and Corinth. Corinth was destroyed and Carthage was destroyed by the legion. From 146, for another 100 years, Rome is in a position of exercising dominance in the Mediterranean lands. She has not yet conquered them all, but there's no more question in anybody's mind. This is the number one power. The Jewish state continued. The Parthians completed their conquest of the empire of the Seleucidae east of Mesopotamia and even in Mesopotamia. In the days of Jesus, we're getting close to this now, there were men living who could remember when the Parthians raided all the way to the Mediterranean seacoast. These Parthians were not a highly civilized group. They were cavalrymen, nomads. They never built a strong state, but their cavalry was very effective, as the Roman legions found out every time they got caught out in the sand. The first triumvirate was Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus. And it was Crassus who led the legions east. He was the rich guy, you know. And the Parthian mounted archers made mincemeat out of the legions and poured molten gold down Crassus' throat. You may remember that from your Latin. Just before the birth of Jesus, or just after the birth of Jesus, I guess, the last Palestine was subdivided into four. The kingdom of Palestine, the kingdom of the Jews, was subdivided into four principalities. And they were called fourth kingdoms, or tetrarchies, meaning a fourth of a kingdom. And their rulers were called tetrarchs instead of kings. They were kinglets, if you please, or grand dukes, to use a modern term. Herod Antipas ruled two parts of the Old Kingdom. He ruled in Perea and Galilee. Philip was a tetrarch ruling opposite Galilee, across the Jordan. I forgot the name of it. Herod Archelaus ruled in Judea. Archelaus got himself into a jam with the Romans, and they pulled him out and replaced him with a Roman governor, which is why Pontius Pilate was in Jerusalem instead of a tetrarch. The old kingdom of Herod the Great was ruled by native princes, except for the fourth part represented by Judea, which was under direct Roman rule. And this is where they had all the trouble with images in the temple. This goes back to the days when they fought the Greeks. And this is why you have such bitterness between Greek culture and Jewish culture. This is why Joseph blew his stack when Jesus suggested they go home and build a gymnasium and an amphitheater like they had in Scythopolis. These Greek cities, the 10 cities, the Decapolis, 10 cities is what that means. Deca from 10, polis from city. The Decapolis. These cities were founded by the Greco-Macedonians when this was a province in Alexander's empire. This is why Flavius had pictures in his home, despite the Mosaic injunction, thou shalt make no graven image, etc. And this is where you have a division between those who hate Greek culture and those who like Greek culture. That's the picture pretty well down to the times of Jesus. This condition continued until the revolt of the Jewish people, which was crushed by Titus. Well, who was his old man? Vespasian? Doesn't sound right. Titus finished the job. And this was within the memory of men living in the days of Jesus. This is roughly about 50 AD, or 60 thereabouts, when they smashed Jerusalem again. On around 150 AD was the last revolt of the Jewish people. And this is when the Romans simply emptied Judea of Jewish people. They built a Roman city on the site of Jerusalem. And I don't think there were just any Jews left there at all. You want to hear the rest of the story of the Jewish people? That's not a nice story. The Jewish people have asked for some of their troubles. They've asked for them because they were a different people. One of the facts I've used to help a Jew understand his relationship to a non-Jewish society has been the fact that the first persecutions and the wholesale killing, slaughtering of Jews took place in Alexandria before the times of Jesus. This is not a Christian peculiarity. In Alexandria, you had a three-phase society. There were the Egyptians. They're the underdogs. They lost the last battle, so they understand their position. There are the Greco-Macedonians. They're the top dogs. They won the last battle, so everybody understands this. But then there's the Jewish community, one of the largest communities outside of Palestine in the ancient world. These people don't fit. They're not bottom dog. They're not top dog. They don't conform to local custom. They don't eat pork. Yes.
Now, how did they get to Alexandria? Was
They
it
migrated there.
Was it they migrated back after the Exodus from there? They
Yes,
migrated back.
that's right. They were there when this was probably before the revolt of the Maccabees.
What are you talking now, 800 BC?
No, I'm talking about 100 BC now. I'm talking 100 BC, roughly. 100 years before the birth of Jesus.
Yes, about so.
That's right, but I'm trying to get this clear when there were
Jews in Egypt.
when the
First person.
middle layer of the Egyptian population were basically Jewish.
Alexander conquered Egypt roughly 335 BC.
And Alexander was a Greek.
Alexander was a Macedonian. Greco-Macedonian, the two merged. Outside of Greece and Macedon, they would have been thought of as one people, like the northerner and the southerner in this country. Sometime, Egypt became independent of the Ptolemies about 300 BC and retained that independence until it became a Roman province after Cleopatra.
But these Jews you speak of are merely a portion of the Jewish nation.
Right.
All right.
Many Jews migrated to Alexandria because under the Ptolemies it became the metropolis of the Mediterranean until Rome eventually surpassed it. And I think for centuries it was the number 2 city in the Mediterranean world.
Them in the wealthy people.
Oh yes, traders, right. They wouldn't conform, and so they encountered their first pogrom, or mass killing. And they were in trouble with the Egyptians. They were in trouble with the Greco-Macedonians. Philo was an Alexandrian Jew. The original translation of the Old Testament into Greek took place in Alexandria. It was this Jewish colony that sent emissaries to Jesus, asking him to come down there and teach.
Being university.
That's right. After the destruction of Jerusalem, the Jews really were dispersed. And they went all over the Roman Empire. They were engaged in various pursuits, farming, trading, mercenary soldiers, this, that, and the other thing. This continued until Christianity got on top in the Roman Empire. And always remember this, it's the Christians who wrote the histories. If others had written the histories, we wouldn't look so good. We favor our side. You'll be amused when you read this book, War Through the Ages. You can tell it's written by a Protestant Christian. Because if you're not a Christian...
We don't look so good after you get up to
You're not-
100 anyway.
Yeah, if you're not a Christian, you're not a very good militarist. And if you're a Catholic, you're nowhere near as good as you are if you're a Protestant. I mean, the man's bias shows through very clearly. You've got to look very hard before you find the story of the pagan martyrs, the worshippers of Mithras, who are dug up when they dig up the Mithraic temple, and they were slaughtered right in the pews in the act of worshiping. This is how the Christians dealt with their opponents. We know all about the Christian martyrs, but we do not know about the non-Christian martyrs. We speak of Julian the Apostate. Yet Julian was one of the most brilliant Romans that ever lived. A scholar who overnight transformed himself into an effective general. He was the last Roman to clean up the Rhineland and kick the Krauts so-and-so over kettle across the Rhine. Well, so much for that. When the Christians got in the saddle, little by little they began passing ordinances against the Jews. The Jewish people had a knack for doing well many things which they did. So they were, by law, prohibited from engaging in agriculture. Then by law prohibited from engaging in this and that and the other thing, until about all that was left for a Jew to do was to trade and loan money.
Would you say that's why they're not, even up to this day, they're not good agriculture?
This is purely a myth. In Palestine, they are excellent farmers.
Right.
Now they are, since they have...
And they react like
migrated.
farmers. They act just like farmers. They're not clever, they're not shrewd. They're the typical country bumpkins. That is, the ones that were born on the farm and grew up on the soil. Jewishness is a culture. It's not a racial thing. It's a cultural thing. The Christian church prohibited loaning money for interest. Now, of course, this is an economic absurdity.
That's something brand new to me.
Now,
That's so good.
this was in the later Roman Empire. Any interest you took, any interest, was usury and was sinful. Now, capital now obviously has a value. I'm sure we all would agree. Since you... What? Well, you can do pretty well.
Could have done very well. $1 more. Well, if you have money and somebody doesn't have money, he's willing to pay you something for the use of your money. I mean, that's conventional today. But in the later Roman Empire and during medieval Christianity, no Christian could accept any interest whatsoever for the utilization of capital. So the Jew became the moneylender to the early medieval world. He was forced into a ghetto because he was denied the right to live anywhere except in a ghetto. When the barbarians came in, they lived on easy terms with the Jew because the Jew knew how to do things that they didn't know how to do.
Where are you now? 1200?
I'm now about 800. An earlier 600. 600. The Jew knew how to get pepper. He had trade contacts. The barbarian liked pepper. The barbarian had no trouble with the Jew until the barbarian began to become commercially sophisticated. Then he took a look at this Jewish enterprise, which was profitable. And he said, I'd like some of that. So there were numerous semi-confiscatory taxations. I mean, you just make a 50% capital levy on all the Jewish businessmen in the country. And finally, each nation excluded the Jew from national boundaries. They simply threw him out because they wanted their businesses. And this wasn't a religious thing. During this same
They were forced to expand their thinking.
Sure.
Consequently, they had become...
Right. Wilma, I have a belief if you run IQs on 1 million Jews selected at random and on 1 million Gentiles selected at random, you'd find the Jews that test out considerably higher because it's been more difficult to survive.
They've had to.
Yeah. Let me pick up another thread now. During this time,
600?
we're up to about 1,200 now in England.
I'm stupid, but I want these dates.
All right.
I like them.
You never remember that.
No, I'm not, but I like continuity.
Right. Now I want to go back to around about 650 AD. We got to pick up the Mohammedan side of the story.
Better believe it, because you're going to be crashing in it before too long.
It was then that the Mohammedans burst forth from Arabia. And they weren't quite as hot as you might think, because the Byzantine Romans, the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and the new Persian Empire had just finished a war of utter exhaustion. It was a 30 or 40 years war that had simply stripped them of resources. This was pretty easy picking.
Well, it was a draw, too, wasn't it?
What's that?
This war.
Well, yeah, it came out. It came out about the way it started. At one time, though, Constantinople had Persians camped on one side of the straits, and the Avars were camped right up against the walls. There wasn't much left except the city and the provinces of Africa. The Arabs found a nominal Christian provinces that were fed up with all the internal bickerings of Christianity. Unitarianism, Trinitarianism, monotheism, Nestorianism, high taxation, and whatnot. And I think the Christians proselyted the Mohammedan religion in wholesale lots. The brands of Christianity they were being offered were not too interesting. The Jew fared well under the Mohammedan rule because Muhammad recognized people who had written scriptures and who believed in one God, and they were to be tolerated. They simply paid an extra tax. Otherwise, they were left to do as they pleased. So a Christian or a Jew stood on an equal footing under the Mohammedans. The Jew prospered. The Christian, I think, tended to turn Mohammedan. The Jew clung to his faith. But he was not persecuted. He paid his tax, and he operated. The Jewish community did very well in all Mohammedan lands. They produced mathematicians. They produced chemists. They produced statesmen. They produced writers, geographers, and so on. In Africa, in the Near East, the Jewish inhabitants shared in the Mohammedan decline that started in about the 15th century and has gone on until, well, is Nasser an improvement? I don't know. But at least things are stirring in that area. You're familiar with what happened to the Jew in Spain when Spain became a consolidated kingdom, the merging of Castile, Leon, Aragon, Navarre, and the final expulsion of the Moors just before the days of Columbus, 1450, 60, and through there. Within a generation, the Jewish people were given a choice of conversion to Christianity or pull up and leave. Get out of Spain. Many converted and remained crypto.
That would have been the Catholicism.
Oh, yeah. That was the only brand of Christianity there was at that time. Many converted and still remain crypto-Jewish people. The Iberian nose is a Jewish heritage, which the Spaniard wears proudly to this day. Is a Jewish heritage, which the Spaniard wears proudly to this day. And incidentally, it's not even a Jewish nose, it's a Hittite nose. A typical Semite does not have a hooked nose. Many of the Jews migrated to Italy. Livorno, Leghorn, is a Jewish stronghold. This is the origin of the southern branch of the Jewish people, the Sephardim. The Asterkazim come from Russia in the east. The Sephardim have had money and education the longest. Barney Baruch is one of the Sephardim Jewish people. The money finder for George Washington was a Jew. I mean, these were the Jews that were here prior to the American Revolution. Let's go back now to Northern Europe.
England was the first to kick the Jewish people out. France followed. Germany followed. But before we move them out, let's consider what happened to them during the Crusades. Generally speaking, during the early Middle Ages, the Jew was a victim of Christian superstition. Many stories were circulated concerning the use of slaughtered babies and their blood in Jewish rites. Many mobs arose to kill many Jewish people. The early Crusaders who went down the Rhine decided that it would be a pretty good idea to have a little practice on these people.
As they were heading east.
As they were heading east. Now, some of these people had lived there 400 and 500 years.
Warm-up session.
This was a warm-up session.
As they head toward Israel.
They broke into one Jewish synagogue, and they found every member of the congregation there dead, because the men killed the women, and then killed each other, rather than submit to forcible conversion to Christianity. One very sporting German baron, just for kicks, turned a castle over to a local Jewish community. And the Crusaders besieged this castle in vain for 6 months. The Jews held it against all comers. In general, the Christian priest and the Christian person, it was very easy to whip up indignation against the Jewish people, and let's have a little pogrom. In general, the Roman Catholic bishop and the Pope opposed these things. The Catholic bishops and the papacy were enlightened as concerned the Jewish people. Gave them sanctuary against Christendom. The higher Catholic clergy comes out pretty clean in the historic annals. The lower clergy and the mass of Christians suffer horribly. I'll say this, if you want to think that the Jew is responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus, he has paid
50 times.
He has paid 1,000,000 times in blood. And if you ever want to be ashamed of being a Christian Gentile, read Will Durant's History of the Jews in the Middle Ages. It's a shocking thing to read. It's a shocking thing to read. The Jew kept moving eastward until along about 15 or 1600, he hit a barrier called the Russian Pale. Russia had been expanding ever since the defeat of the Golden Horde, the Mongols, and the Russians drew a line in mid-Russia. Did not exclude the western provinces of Russia, but after you went into Russia about 200 miles, there was a line called the Pale, and no Jew was permitted east of this line.
How do you spell it?
P-A-L-E. Beyond the Pale.
Beyond the Pale.
That's the expression.
Okay.
Right. That happens to come from Ireland, from a different reason, but it's the same Jew. Some of the Jews in Russia, in fact, many of the Jews in Russia, are not Jews by birth. They're Jews by tradition and culture. One of the last groups of conquerors that came into the Ukraine and South Russia were the Khazars. They were a bunch of hard-riding Asiatic horsemen who came in with the usual technique of murder, fire, rape, and what have you. And they occupied the Ukraine at a time when there was maneuvering between Christian and Mohammedan in this area. And the Khazars wanted to be neutral. They didn't want to go either way. This was the only mass conversion to the Jewish religion that has ever taken place in the history of Jewry. I have talked to some Astrakajan Jews, a few of whom know that they are Khazars. Generally speaking, the Eastern Jew does not know this.
He does.
That's right.
He doesn't know that his forefathers
they're just as non-Jewish as a Swede.
Yeah.
Or a bloodstream standpoint. Little by little, as the Europeans developed commercial sophistication, they lost their fear of the Jew. So they relaxed the prohibition and they let him come back westward. They now had gotten enough commercial savvy so they could compete with the Jew. They let him in with restrictions. They let him live in a ghetto. This is the condition in Jewry until Napoleon. Napoleon abolished the ghetto. Liberty, equality, fraternity extended to the Jewish people as well as all other people. The end of the European ghetto system starts with the Napoleonic era. As I study Jews today, and I study them for the same reason I study Roman Catholics, I have to deal with them, I have to understand them. I have to be able to talk to a Jew within his framework. These people are puzzled. They are terribly sensitive as a people. I know of very few who are not sensitive. This is by actual test measurements. I'm startled when I find a non-sensitive Jew. The thing that he's worried about is the fear that in a moment of anger, his Gentile friend will slap him with a statement, "You Jew." And as
Like a thing.
yes, as my Jewish friends have said, to this there is no answer. Now this stands in contrast to an interesting experiment. Israel is, to me, a very interesting test tube. There are a bunch of Jewish youngsters up in Prague behind the Iron Curtain. And it happened to be a little popular in the satellite countries to be anti-Semitic at the moment. So they were sitting in a restaurant, and some of the Czechoslovakians decided they'd bait them, so they called them Jews. These lads kept on eating because, as they had grown up in Israel, there was nothing wrong with being called a Jew. The term had lost its sting to them. Let's consider the quality of Jewishness. A Jewish friend of mine once put it this way. He said there are three kinds of Jews. There are Hebrews, Jews, and kites. He said Hebrews wrote the Old Testament. They're among the great people of earth. He said a man like Baruch is a Hebrew. Einstein was a Hebrew. Brandes is a good example. He said, I'm not that good. He said, I'm a Jew, an ordinary guy. Now he said, I don't like kikes any better than you do. This is poor white trash. Never got it.
Like Sandy Irish.
Yes, versus lace curtain Irish. The Jew has developed some sociological qualities which have been imposed upon him by the Gentile. He can't join this, that, or the other thing. I recall talking to a Jewish attorney, the only attorney in our company, Standard Oil. And we were at Flossmoor Golf Club. I was playing with the controller, this attorney, and our director of research. And Roberts, who was a great chemist and very stupid where people were concerned. We had such a good time playing. He said, Bergie, why don't we get Al in the club out here? Albert Green was his name. At which point I almost died because Bergie hit my shin with his foot instead of Robert's shin. And now I worked with Al Green closely. A finer gentleman I've never known in my life. Al was not a Jew by profession. Al had no religion. His wife was an Episcopalian. His kids were raised Episcopalian. And Joe kept right on talking. And Bergie hit my other shin. And this went on, and I watched poor Al Green turn whiter and whiter and whiter.
And start missing putts.
No, this is the 19th hole.
Oh, you're in the ninth. Oh.
Until finally, Al turned to Joe Roberts and said, Joe, you don't understand. I'm a Jew.
Oh.
Then, of course, Roberts damn near died.
You just Just running the kick.
I had a couple of sore shins.
Mental and physical, too.
And I damn near died too, because I loved Al. I worked with Al closely. I knew this man well. Al and I happened to be, well, we used to hold each other's hands because back in the 30s we were the only two anti-Nazis in that whole company. There are a lot of potential fascists in America. I listened to them in the 30s. There are in the 60s. Yeah, I know.
You know, Bill, too, so many of the energies and things that if they find that them being Jewish doesn't matter to you, they love you very much.
Sure, that's right.
Just
Let's consider what I want to call ghetto traits. Ghetto traits are produced by ghettos. They are sociological. They are not genetic or biological. Toynbee makes a good point when he says that the Jew who is born on the land in Palestine and grows up a farmer, whose father farmed, whose grandfather founded that farm. This is about as far back as you can go. He reacts just like a farmer. He's guileless. You can sell him the Brooklyn Bridge. He'll buy gold bricks just like farmers do. He doesn't know any better. Toynbee also makes this point. Can you consider anybody brawnier, nervier, tougher than the Normans? The Vikings who settled in the north of France, who conquered England, who conquered the south of Italy and Sicily. Frederick Hohenstaufen was a Norman. The spearhead of the Crusades were Normans. Richard Coeur de Lion was a Norman.
I didn't think Vikings were Norwegian.
Yes. They're the Northmen. But Norman is a corruption of Northman. The French couldn't keep them off the coast, so they got smart. They gave them the coast and says, here, settle down and keep your friends out, see? This is the origin of the Duchy of Normandy. About 100 years before the days of William the Conqueror. These Norman descendants of the Crusaders were caught with the Ottoman Turks when the Ottoman Turks overran this area. When the Turks took over, they organized the cities and they put all of the Christians in ghettos, exactly like a Jewish ghetto. And in these ghettos, the descendants of these Norman knights developed the same traits that a Jew develops in a ghetto, which is becoming servile, slippery, double-dealing, anything to survive. So much so that the Turks in their heyday, they were tough fighters. They had two expressions for a Christian. A Sweetwater Frank, who lived in a ghetto, and they would spit on him. And a Saltwater Frank, who came from across the water and was a tough fighter like they were. They had contempt for a Sweetwater Frank. They respected a Saltwater Frank. There's the story of the...
Ghetto, too, takes away they don't have the outside influence to make them fighters and all.
That's right. How can you either... You stand up and get tough and you get killed. Quick. So pretty soon you learn you don't stand up and get tough. You're hopelessly outnumbered.
Well, Bill, according to your way of thinking, the Jewish people were not the chosen race.
I think they were, yes. I think they missed their boat.
Do you think they were chosen or do you think they were dead?
I think they were, I think they had an opportunity which they missed. As the papers point out, they could have become a royal priesthood. Palestine prepared them for life anywhere on the face of the earth. They've proved it. They've thrived everywhere they've gone, from China to America.
Well, there again, it was a case of having to work with extra brains, which I love.
Yeah.
Span.
The Jewish people were unique in one respect only. They had a succession of prophets. No other people in recorded history had this succession of teachers of Jews. They had individuals, one or two, but not a dozen. From Samuel to Deutero-Isaiah, they came with regularity. And as you study the Old Testament in chronological order, you can see the papers make this point very clearly. Yahweh evolved. Yahweh started out as a fairly 2x4, a kind of a 2-bit cheap god of a fulminating volcano who was strictly tribal, who was a conniver, who said to the Jews, glom onto everything you can lay your hands on before you leave Egypt. This is a God who doesn't care about the Egyptians, you know. Steal from the strangers. Then you wind up with Deutero-Isaiah. Well, Jesus practically exhausted the Old Testament in quoting him. Jesus was willing to adopt this concept as representative of his Father. There's only one other religion, I think, that's had a parallel evolution. That's Northern Buddhism. Northern Buddhism has evolved a tremendous God concept, I think. Toynbee points out that, Toynbee draws a conclusion that the two best religions on the face of the earth are Christianity and Mahayana Buddhism. And then he draws a further conclusion. Neither of them is adequate. Neither is adequate. And I agree with it. They're the two best. If I'd never heard about Christianity, I would be a Mahayana Buddhist.
It's time to still in it.
Yes.
Bill, what is the situation of the Jew, the Eastern Jew, at the height of the Crusade?
It depends on how long he's been there. When he first goes, he's welcome because he brings many nice things. They like him. He has pepper. He has foreign exchange. He has exotic foods, silks. He never lost his international contact. And then little by little, you figure out he's making money off this. He's making money off me. Let's take it away from him. We outnumber him.
Well, is he so astute that he is trading with both Muhammad?
Oh, yeah. Sure. He was a
the
Brit.
Mohammedan and the Christian, and getting fairly well adjusted to where he can deal with both.
He got his markup. The thing that is not liked about a Jew how many drivers who have a driver cut them off in front sharply, they'll cuss if it's a man, but if it's a woman, they'll say, another woman driver. If it's a man driver, they just say, they don't comment on the sex of the driver. Oh, this is true. If you are outsmarted by a Gentile, you were outsmarted. But if you're outsmarted by a Jew, you remember that it was a Jew who outsmarted you. I went down to Philadelphia, and I spent a week with a group of the toughest merchants on the East Coast. It's the worst merchandising corner in North America. It's where Gimbels, Strawbridge and Clothier, and Litt Brothers operate. On the fourth corner, they should have an ulcerative heart clinic. There is no other corner like it in the world that I know of. Wanamaker's is down the road just a little from there. Litt Brothers is the toughest, lowest grade store in Philadelphia. I mean, this is price. This is dog eat dog, tooth and fang. This is a Jewish operation. When I got back to Chicago, some of my buddies said, well, how did you make out down there? I said, what do you mean? Well, I mean, you're kind of with the tribe. I said, oh, I see what you mean. I said, they're interesting people. I said, I found them very stimulating because I can think just as fast as the smartest of them. But I said, God help me if I hadn't been able to think that fast. I would have come away with great resentment.
It's Wanamaker's time.
think so. No, they're well rooted down.
Bill, on the chosen people deal, would you elaborate on that just a little bit? Were they a chosen people? As such, I mean, I'm
They could
wondering
have
if
been.
we're using the wrong word.
Abraham was
You
a
don't
chosen
think they were
person,
loved? Do you think they were
No.
loved any more than anyone
but I
else?
think they were prepared to do a job.
Well, then would the word designate be applicable at all?
I think so. I think the Jewish people had the possibility. Stop and consider, why did Jesus appear on earth as a Jew?
Well, I think they were better prepared as a religious.
Right.
They believed in one God.
That's right. Do you think of any other reason?
They were at a.
one of the most, yeah.
They were located geographically.
Yeah. They were also a blend of good stock, able stock. They had a compulsory educational system.
I tell you, Bert, look, I'll accept your designation. You accept my chosen, and let's stop that. I just was.
They also had profited from
I'm not really
Bacchus in Salem, which is Jerusalem. I mean, that was the seat of what they call it, the University of Salem, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a nice city. I get a
I
healthy
didn't
respect.
ever think it was natural.
This was a crossroads
I
of the
get a
world.
healthy respect for
This
Moses.
was a crossroads of the world.
He was a brilliant
Moses is my ideal.
man.
Moses is my ideal.
Moses was a
You
brilliant
don't
man.
think that
He did a little conniving, but
he was actually given the Ten Commandments on the stone? You think he could do it out himself?
you can go get a drink of water.
Did I interrupt you too soon?
I don't-
No,
Wilma, I don't know.
You never cease to amaze.
Wilma, I don't know, except I will say this. I think Moses I think Moses had the same philosophy that St. Paul had. I'm willing to do and be whatever is necessary to get my story across. Paul said, I'm willing to be all things to all men. I think Moses shared that. Now, whether you agree with these men or disagree with them,
Somehow
they were successful.
Paul a little more. I think Paul was more that.
Paul had more to work with. Moses had nothing.
I respect Moses more because he had less ammunition.
Good heavens,
Good Lord.
Paul was working with a literate society. Moses was working with illiterate people.
Better one.
People that had nothing but gross superstition.
Oh, Bill.
And a bunch of rags on their
You
back.
can handle illiterate people better than you can literate.
But it takes different tactics.
Sure.
And Moses used the tactics that were necessary.
And Paul used the tactics.
Apparently so. Apparently. So these men succeeded. Abner failed.
Say, I wanted to elaborate on that. In what way did Abner fail? I didn't know that he did.
All right, let's pick up some more history. The thing that transmitted Jesus' message to the world was the Greek language and Greek culture. It very quickly passed from the Jewish to the Greek. Rome studied Greek civilization. The Roman recognized that whatever the limitations of the Greek culture was a higher level of culture than Roman culture. In 500 BC, Athens was a dictator, and Rome was a little fording place on the Tiber River, having just recently expelled the Etruscans. The Etruscans were far in advance of the Romans, or the Latins. When Alexander conquered the East, there was a mass exodus from Greece and Macedonia that most historians overlook. Think of how many Alexandrias were founded, Antiochs were founded, and so on, Alexandretas. This was the original Drang nach Osten, the March on the East. There must have been a mass exodus out of Greece and Macedonia to the east because these people had to come from somewhere. There's a reason why the Romans found the Greeks such easy picking 200 years later. I think Greece was pretty well denuded of people, and especially of its more adventurous, able people. This produced not a solid culture, but a steel structure, a spiderweb steel structure of Greek culture, which went from city to city effectively all the way from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. The cultural transmission lines were in existence to transmit Jesus' message east just as effectively as west. It wasn't as extensive numerically, but it was just as extensive in terms of the permeation of cultural centers. The city dwellers spoke Greek all the way to the Indus River, at least as a second language, and many Greeks lived there. Even after the Parthians cut this empire in two, the eastern wing under the Bactrians continued to be Greek, and they conquered extensively in North India. They spread a thin veneer of Greek culture all over North India. When they lost their original homelands in Parthia, they persisted. When they lost Afghanistan, they persisted in what's now Pakistan and the Kashmir. They lasted until about the times of Jesus' boyhood. Then they were conquered in turn by some nomads who came in, much as the Ostrogoths came into Italy. They came in friendly-like. They didn't want to tear down civilization, they wanted to preserve it. These nomads were pro-Greek. They were the Kushans. And at that time, it produced a peculiar shaped state built like a boomerang. Can you see Pakistan on the map? And Afghanistan? Here you've got India coming down like this, see? Then you've got the Indus River coming up here, and you've got Afghanistan up here. All right. This whole area was the southern end of the Kushan kingdom. Then it went up into what's now Russian Turkestan. And then it turned and went east, north of Tibet, into what's Chinese Turkestan. It was boomerang shaped. In about 90 AD, and this I think is one of the really crucial events of history, a religious fermentation took place in the Kushan domains. And what is virtually a new religion evolved. This is the origin of Mahayana Buddhism. Hinayana Buddhism, the Buddhism that continued in India till it was wiped out, and which still continues in Burma and Ceylon, is Hinayana Buddhism. Call it fundamentalist Buddhism if you want to. The original teachings of Buddha. Mahayana Buddhism are based more on the life of Buddha. And the one is greater than the other, as Jesus aptly pointed out when talking to Conant. Your Buddha was much greater than your Buddhism. Buddha's life has more truth in it than Buddha's teachings. Buddha taught a teaching which would cause a man to become a monk, to withdraw from the world, to seek his salvation in isolation. This is the concept of the Arhat, or the saint of Hinayana Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism teaches a counter-concept, the concept of the Bodhisattva, or the one who spends himself in the service of the world. The Arhat is based on what Buddha said. The Bodhisattva is based on how Buddha lived. This new religion was born in the Kushan domains under the friendly rule of these conquering nomads who weren't Buddhists, who weren't Christians, who weren't Hindus, but were mildly pro-Greek in their attitudes. And because of this political government, which was kind of neutral and uncontending in the religious sense, it favored the evolution of this religion. This is the religion that moved up over the high passes in Central Asia and around the seaports and came to China and to Japan. This is the religion which overspread Confucian morality, just as the teachings of Jesus overspread Socratic philosophy in Europe. Confucian morality is not a religion, really. It's a code of ethics. And it didn't fight with Buddhism any more than Greek philosophy fought with Christianity. They reconciled to each other. This is where the teachings of Jesus should have latched on to Buddhism as a carrier in the East, just as they latched on to Judaism as a carrier in the West. Buddhism would have served as the ideal vehicle for carrying the teachings of Jesus to the whole Orient. And there's no reason why you shouldn't float Jesus on top of Buddha just as much as you float Jesus on top of Moses and Isaiah. He floats anywhere you put him. The good Lord provided the channel, but the good Lord has also endowed human beings with freedom of choice. And he can't override those choices. Now,
One more step in there.
Abner should have prepared the way. But Abner made the same mistake that the Melchizedek missionaries made in Mesopotamia. Melchizedek commissioned his teachers to preach that God is trustworthy, that God is a covenant-keeping deity. And instead they got all mixed up with social reform. They decided that temple prostitution was a reprehensible practice, and so they went out on a big mass crusade to clean up the temples, and as a result, the whole Melchizedek teaching got plowed under. Now maybe temple prostitution is reprehensible, but Melchizedek had not told them to go out in the world and clean up prostitution. He said, teach about God. Jesus never commissioned Abner to inveigh against polygamy or to set up stringent moral codes. Abner did all of this, and the Mohammedan religion is a monument to Abner's failure. These people were not willing to buy.
Is that in the Iraq?
No,
Some of it is.
Some of it is. Now, I'll tell you what is not in the Urantia book. This to me is very significant. You will find almost nothing of Jesus' teaching to Abner and the 12 apostles of John the Baptist.
That's true. I know that.
You'll find that he visited them. He did this, he did that. You will find nothing in particular of Jesus' caravan trip to the east. You're merely told that a lot of people benefited and so forth. They'll give you his talks at Urmia. They don't tell you what happened in the detail.
Later that he's never recognized as a traveler in the east by the way.
This is a tragic failure. A tragic failure. And the Blue Book just isn't interested in exploring failure. In principle, they simply say Abner was too rigid and uncompromised. Example. Abner sends teachers to Urmia, where Jesus had no trouble teaching. And these Christians were so stiff-necked that they disrupted Urmia. They were so uncompromised.
Well, just like some of our Christian others.
Exactly.
Scare more people away.
No, I think the great failure in the East was there were no teachers of Jesus' message in the Kushan domains when a new religion was born. A new evolution of Buddhism, and a far superior religion to Buddhism. This is the type of Buddhism which I heard Kagawa, the Japanese Christian, describe. I went down to Methodist Temple in Chicago to hear him. When he said, if you send people over to Japan who do not have the Spirit of Christ in them, he says, you're wasting your time because the Buddhists have got everything we've got except the Spirit of Christ. They've got an excellent God concept. They've got a concept of a benign, a merciful, a beneficent God who will listen to your prayers, who will answer them. They've got everything except Christ in advanced Buddhism.
It's a much better concept of God than some of our Christians.
It's much more tolerant. Yes. The tolerance of Buddhism appeals to me very much.
Wouldn't Moses make a fine secretary for him?
Lord, yes. Well, I agree with the Blue Book. They call him the matchless Moses. And they say he was the most important human being to live on earth between the times of Melchizedek and the times of Christ. He was the most successful religious teacher I think that the world has produced. Well, he built something and it's still here.
And we have to get some books that is trying to written anything on Moses. Blow your ass. You have to do a study on Moses.
There's much known about Moses, other than the story in the Blue Book is about as good as any. There's just not much known.
I don't have a...
There isn't very much on him in here?
Oh, yeah, there's lots in here, but I never had the feeling of warmth for him as I had right this minute.
I'll tell you what you do.
How smart he was.
Get the Dawn of Conscience and see what Preston says. That's the Dawn of Conscience. You will be very thrilled because this will open up an aspect of history which most of us don't know anything about. It's Preston's distillate of Egyptian writing in terms of the best of their moral and spiritual teaching. His frontispiece quote is established as the man whose way is righteousness and who walketh according to its precepts. This is from a quotation from the Grand Vizier Tahotep about 3000 BC.
I am constantly amazed. That's what we're finding out, that I am finding out about the past. Through hearing you and Jurassic Book and things that I read on the outside. Of course, I'm being more alert all the time to find these things in just ordinary reading matter. But I am constantly amazed at the past, at the concept of religion. The scientific things that the Greeks
They had many things. The Chinese had many things too.
yes, and the Indians.
Yes.
The
The Hindus.
Well, Mom, you're
Yes,
getting
yes.
barely right behind the ears, and 1,000 years from
I don't think
now...
I'm dry yet.
1,000 years from now...
Well,
you
they
can
still...
Look 1,000 years back.
They're still finding out things too. I'm finding out things as I keep studying.
But I know you know this. Your father told us the other day that in this research that he's doing now was on the Old Testament Christ, he had come across her, and he told us, but I don't remember whether it was his work, that he had come across the statement that Christianity is the story of Jesus
Yes.
instead of the story about him. The story about Jesus rather
Yes.
than he was found.
It was the sheer majesty of his teaching, the purity of his teaching, that got through the well, in spite of all the things about the church and religion that welled his well. It was the truth of Jesus that his well.
He didn't rebel against Jesus.
No, just in what we've done with him.
Just on what? Just on everything
Based on our Bible.
subsequent to him, just about.
I will remember this in analyzing what the priests did to the Old Testament. Let's be fair. Here were the leaders of a defeated people. They had all the normal feelings of patriotism, which all people have. Here were some writings, the book of the doings of the kings of Judah, the book of the doings of the kings of Israel. These are mentioned in the Blue Book. They're source material. They decided to put together a textbook which would resurrect the feeling of Jewish patriotism and enable them to reconstitute a nation. They didn't realize they were writing a book that we were going to call sacred, any more than Paul is to be held responsible for the use to which we put his private correspondence. And I think Paul wrote Hebrews, and I think that the difference between Hebrews and the other things is Paul writing for public consumption and Paul writing a letter. My Lord, I'd hate to have my letters published. Now, let's draw a parallel. There's a tradition in this country about Minutemen. It's one of the reasons we usually start a war with our completely unprepared. Our historians carefully eliminate George Washington's scathing comments about the Minutemen. Washington had absolutely no use for Minutemen. In essence, he says they're here 1 minute and they're gone the next minute when you need them. Washington wanted disciplined troops. How many of you remember the name Rochambeau? This was a French major general who commanded a division of French regulars that were very helpful to George Washington. You know about Pulaski, you know about von Steuben, you know about Lafayette, but you don't know about Rochambeau. He commanded the French troops. How many of you have heard the name de Grasse? All right, let me ask you a question. The last engagement of the Revolutionary War was at Yorktown, wasn't it? Where Washington hemmed in Cornwallis and starved him out to the point where he had to surrender. Yorktown is a seaport. How could George Washington starve out Cornwallis when the British commanded the seas and could have supplied Cornwallis? The answer is the British had temporarily lost command of the seas to a French admiral by the name of de Grasse, who commanded the French fleet operating off the Atlantic coast of North America. About 6 years later, Nelson, then a rear admiral, caught de Grasse down in the Caribbean and gave him what Paddy gave the drum. But in the meantime, we had achieved our independence. Why did England make peace with the United States? She wasn't broke. I mean, she proved it later. Look how long she took on Napoleon. Why did she give up? There was another French admiral. I forget his name. The French had just recently lost to the English in India. They lost to the English in India at the same time that they lost to the English in Canada. This was part of the same war. This French admiral was operating off the Coromandel coast of India. He weighed about 300 pounds, and he was a fighting fool. About 6 years later, Nelson, then a rear admiral, caught de Grasse down in the Caribbean and gave him what Paddy gave the drum. But in the meantime, we had achieved our independence. Why did England make peace with the United States? She wasn't broke. I mean, she proved it later. Look how long she took on Napoleon. Why did she give up? There was another French admiral. I forget his name. The French had just recently lost to the English in India. They lost to the English in India at the same time that they lost to the English in Canada. This was part of the same war. This French admiral was operating off the Coromandel coast of India. He weighed about 300 pounds, and he was a fighting fool. And he had a ragtag squadron of French ships that he could barely keep afloat because they'd been in so many engagements. But every time he'd catch an Englishman, he'd sink her. And he was completely disrupting British trade with India. And so they met at number 10 Downing Street, and they said, something has to be done. If we continue war on two fronts with France, we've got to raise the tax rate to another shilling in the pound. And if we raise the tax rate, we're going to lose the next general election. Our party will go out of power. We can maintain war on either front without raising the tax rate. So it's obvious. The place to make peace is with these 13 colonies because they've never made any money for us. These are the people who won't even pay taxes to defend the French and Indian frontier. They want all that tax money to be paid by Englishmen. The Pennsylvanians, the New Yorkers are not even willing to tax themselves to maintain their own militia. England had 13 feisty de Valeras to contend with. No wonder she made peace, because she wanted to quit the French in India, because that's where all the money was coming from, India. Now there's one French major general and 2 French admirals that are not mentioned in our history books because it sounds better if we whipped England. But it just doesn't happen to be a fact.
Well, that's real good.
Now you talk about brainwashing. Our history books are no more distorted than the Old Testament is distorted.
You mean the Old Testament is more distorted than our history books?
Yes, yes. You see, we live our myth.
And now Russia is distorting the history books.
That's right.
What you want?
Okay.
Wilma, I have a real passion to know what's real. I want to get through the legends into reality. It doesn't disturb me in the least that we were deeply indebted to the French for our independence. Not in the least. I think we did a pretty good job anyway. But I think if more Americans knew this, they'd have more facts to know. Just as if more Jews knew their history, they would be less tempted to think of themselves as Herren folk, which is one of the traps that a Jew falls into. And it says so in our Bible. Our Bible says he's chosen people. He doesn't have to quote his Bible, he can quote the Christian Bible. No, Rochambeau, de Grasse, and I wish I could remember the Fat Admiral's name.
The Fat Admiral was on the Indian coast. Coast.
He just was barely keeping his ship
Well, we
afloat.
might have had a little bit of a different history if they said, well, we just fight one, so let's drop in.
If they'd have made peace with France, they could have really come at us. England wasn't worn out. Not in the least.
The French weren't ready to make peace. They were smarting from the...
That's right. So you're only from 1765 to about 1780. It's only 15 years since the French lost Quebec.
Reiterate for us again the Hohenzollern concept in the history book of 1910 and the concept in 1920.
Where I got started on this was when I was a freshman in high school. My folks gave me a very decent allowance to buy school books with. But I early discovered that if you bought real beat-up books, you could get them cheap, and then you had money left over to buy more books. So I used to buy the most beat-up textbooks I could find. And this would be 1920, more or less. And I got me a medieval modern history of Europe by Meyer, I believe it was. Date 1902 was the oldest, cheapest text I could find. And I'm sitting in class, and we're dealing with the rise of Prussia. And in my book it says, from earliest times, the Hohenzollerns had recognized that Prussia had no natural frontiers and therefore had wisely provided for the maintenance of an efficient standing army for national defense. That's what it says in my book. Our current textbook was written right after World War I. And every other text in the class that the class read said, from earliest times, the Hohenzollerns had maintained an evil passion for arms and armament. And this is where I lost all faith in printed material.
That's where your eyes were.
This opened my eyes. And it was just about that time I read a book from the library of a classmate of mine. Lenny's father was an Anglican minister who became a Unitarian. He moved to this country in many earlier years with his books, including Len's childhood books. And some of you may have read books written by Arthur Guy Henty, who was quite a writer of youthful adventure stories. And this is one that Henty wrote for English consumption, not for this country. It was called True to the Old Flag. And it was a story of some British loyalists in the days of the American Revolution. And it was then I realized that the only difference between George Washington and Jefferson Davis was who won the last battle. No, our history's been rewritten. And I say these things not to debunk American tradition, but merely to point out that the Americans are no different from the Jewish priests in the days of Babylon. We haven't put fiction in, but we have left out many facts, important facts.
Which makes it harder to tell true reality.
That's right.
Well, no one's telling until they're right.
I'm so grateful for that 1902 text.
I mean, I think that's a gem.
It is.
I think that is a gem.
Myers, yeah. I think it was Myers. I wouldn't swear. But there are two diametrically opposed statements, depending on when the book was written.
Well, how did you get out of that? Because I'm sure you're aggressive enough that you marked up and said,
I just quit talking about it after a little while. That's how the teacher got out of it. But then I started looking.
you confirmed it with 1902 version.
Oh, sure. I got up and read it in class. I think they gave me some, whitewash like, well, we approved history to go along with that.
It is selected to be two facts later on.
This is right. We have facts and we have true facts. Now this is what Jesus ran into, was the ideological set of the Jewish people for nationalism. And this is why they didn't accept it. They were sold that they had a manifest destiny to be an independent nation. And recent history tended to support them, because that was Roman foreign policy. So once Rome got on top, Rome didn't want to divide and rule. Rome just wanted to rule. And she had the power to make her authority felt.
Let's take a 5-minute break and reconvene.
We're a long ways away from the unqualified entity.
I know we are. Differentiation. And
The first question is, what does the word deity mean, and what does the word divinity mean? I don't suppose that I could answer this consistently 2 times hand running, but I'm going to tell you what they mean to me today.
I said you're not. There it is.
Deity normally is a reality. Divinity ordinarily means a quality. Deity normally is a noun. Divinity normally is an adjective. It's a quality which deity has. Wherever you find divinity, there some phase of deity is in action. Some part of deity, or all deity, is in action. Divinity is described, that is, the comprehensible elements of divinity are described as truth, beauty, and goodness.
Say that one last one.
The comprehensible elements of divinity are described as truth, beauty, and goodness. To me, stated very simply, the most that a thing can be is beautiful. The most that an idea can be is true. the most that a being can be is good. We're told that in living personalities, truth, beauty, and goodness are unified, and that they're disclosed as love and as mercy and as ministry. We're told that God is the source of love. The Son is the source of mercy. And mercy is defined as love applied. We're told that the Spirit is the source of ministry. And ministry is described as love in action. When truth, beauty, and goodness are unified by personality, living personality, the unification is love. Its application is mercy. Its action is ministry. Hence the definition of love as the desire to do good to others. And the truly good must also be beautiful. And the beautifully good must also be true. And the truly beautiful must also be good. These are inseparable as they are displayed by divinity. We find them in distortion in human experience. I am personally very repelled by the isolated concept of goodness. This to me is a thin-lipped type of goodness, a goodness which would burn my body for the salvation of my soul. Indeed, a good exchange, but I would just assume that my fellow man not make that judgment concerning me. If my body needs burning for the salvation of my soul, I would cheerfully submit to burning at any moment, because it's a good swap. The Jewish religion presents a concept of moral goodness that is lacking in the attractiveness of truth and beauty. Greek philosophy presents a beautiful approach to truth, which is wholly lacking in the moral fiber of goodness. The excellence of Christianity stems from the fact that it borrows heavily from both Jew and Greek. The Greek religion never became worthy of the name. Greek philosophy could never appeal to the mass of Greeks. But the Jewish religion, with its austerities, is a very repellent concept, and so is Christianity when it follows that particular pattern. Deity is that which is characterized by divinity. Quote, divinity is the characteristic, unifying quality of deity. Unquote. Page 3 of the Urantia book, I think somewhere, near the top of page 3. Wherever you find something divine, you are dealing with deity directly or indirectly. To the extent that truth, beauty, and goodness are discoverable in human life, I believe you can attribute this to man's spiritual endowment. And man's spiritual endowment, in the last analysis, proceeds from deity. God is an aspect of deity. A deity is a larger word than the word God. God means a personality. Deity includes the personality qualities of God and also embraces other than personal qualities. God as a father is a personal aspect of deity. You cannot say that deity is a father. Jesus never said He who has seen me has seen deity. He said, he who has seen me has seen the Father. He used the word Abba. He did not use the word Eloah or Elohim, which would be the Hebrew for deity. Eloah would be the plural of deity, which would be quasi-Trinitarian in its implications. The Trinity, the Paradise Trinity, or any Trinity, is deity, and no Trinity is ever personality. But each Trinity tends to personalize in deity, tends to personalize some level of deity. God the Father, God the Son, and God the Spirit are not members of the Paradise Trinity, except as we would make that statement loosely. The deity of the Father, the deity of the Son, and the deity of the Spirit constitute the Paradise Trinity. They are members of that Trinity as deities and not as personalities. When the papers say the Paradise Trinity of Father, Son, and Spirit, this is a loose statement, a convenient statement to make, rather than saying it awkwardly as I said it. But as I said it would be technically more correct. I think the deity-personality relationship can be seen most clearly when we examine the Universal Father, or the first source and center. The word first source and center to me is the name of the deity of the first person of deity, the deity of God, the deity of the Universal Father. The term first source and center is to me a larger term than the term Universal Father. The term first source and center is to me a less meaningful term than the term Universal Father, because Universal Father is a name for the relationship which the first source and center has to you and to me as a child of God. I think of the first source and center as having at least 7 facets, each of which stands in relationship to some other aspect of reality. Can I put reality up here with deity?
I mean, yeah.
Can you visualize a cube? A cube has 6 sides, does it not? And if we could say that a cube had an interface, then we could say that a cube had a 7th side, could we not? Its internal side. I think the first source and center stands in relationship to all absolute reality. And now I'm using a word that is bigger than the word deity. Reality, capitalized, is the largest word I know. It's the biggest word I know. It's synonymous with infinity. Because stop and think. If it's real, then it is, was, and has been, will be. And you can't have any bigger word, can you? Because this includes potential reality, actual reality, deity reality, undeified reality, becoming reality. Visualize our cube. Can you see its 6 sides? Top, bottom, north, south, east, and west side. I want you to picture, and inside. I want you to picture this cube in relation to 7 spheres, balls,
The balls are just slightly smaller than the cube. About the same size, but would fit inside the cube. I want you to visualize each of these balls as being opposite one face of the cube. You see this clearly? And I want you to visualize
left over.
the seventh ball as being inside of the cube. Now let me read to you the names which the papers give to the relationship between the face of the cube and the